equality and cultural responsiveness, and implementing and supporting anti-racist curriculum at every grade level. Through this work, teachers at all levels will be better able to recognize, respond to, and stop incidents of bias, racism, and microaggressions. They will also have the tools to implement age-appropriate curriculum and classroom discussions around racism and social justice. This needs to be part of the curriculum at Mercy at every grade level from preschool through grade 12. As a predominantly white community, the duty to work actively against racism falls squarely in our laps. It is not the duty of minority populations to work for change. Rather, it is our responsibility as people of privilege to do so. As members of the Mercy community, we are ready to embrace and support the hard work ahead. We hope that you will join this action by signing this important resolution and forming an anti-racist curriculum review team. Thank you. So I did gather signatures for this letter because I wanted to convey how important this is to our community. And so far I've gotten roughly 300 signatures on that, which I will be sending along to Pam and Shannon. To give you an idea of who signed the letter, roughly half were former Mercy students or current students at MERHS, and about 40% are former parents. Of the people who signed the letter, over half indicated that they'd like to be part of future conversations about combating racism in our community. So this is obviously something that many people care about and many people are willing to put in work towards. I think to a lot of us, it doesn't seem urgent to work on this because most of us don't face racism on a daily basis, but we should be confronting this with the same racism, with the same urgency that we would be if our kids were discriminated against because of their skin color. I know that this is a long game and it basically involves sort of rebuilding the culture of our schools, but I think that process that we need to start and that we can start with small actions now. So I want to thank you in advance for considering these requests. I did see that the resolution is on the agenda for tonight, so I'm looking forward to that, and I'm hoping that we can start taking steps.
Kate, thank you. That was a phenomenal letter. And I know I speak for the rest of the school committee and in saying that we are in 100% agreement with you. As you see, the resolution is on our agenda. These are conversations we're starting to have. And I really appreciate you pointing out that it is a long game, because it is. But it's got to start somewhere and the conversation's got to start now. So I appreciate you taking the time to write that letter. It is not falling on deaf ears. This is work we all have to start to do. School, community, families, all of it. So thank you. We will be discussing that a little bit further on in the agenda. So stay tuned.
Great. Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Jake, I think you wanted to speak as well.
Yes, and I'll make a few comments. I did as well write a letter. I just recently sent it to Pam, so I'm sure she'll forward it to everybody, and you can read the details when you have a chance. But Carla and I are writing to ask that you all think about a process for the next school year that involves parents in curriculum and instruction planning. We appreciate the recognition by school committee and district staff that significant work needs to be done this summer for school reopening. And the focus on health and safety absolutely needs to be there. We worry, however, that planning will not move beyond health and safety protocols, and that we really need to think about what curriculum and instruction looks like in a hybrid model. And so I see on the agenda that there is a curriculum update, so I look forward to seeing what that might entail. But fundamentally, first of all, I want to say that we know that everybody is thinking about the health and safety part, and everybody's got their attention on that. And I know that the district and school committee will have a sound plan for everybody being safe. But our bigger concern is how school will be experienced next fall. And there's kind of two essential questions for us. One, what will it likely take to make a physically safe in-school learning environment, and what will the resulting experience be? And then what might the impact be on our child's mental health? In a hybrid model, thinking about in school with a physical distancing, small groups of 10 students contained to a single room, desks 6 feet apart facing forward, what is that going to look like to be an effective social engagement, small group work? How are we going to make that happen is going to require a thoughtful plan and parent involvement in that plan. And the remote learning, in our experience, we really struggled with that last spring. We've heard the school committee conversations about that, and we appreciate the work that everybody did to make that possible. We have not heard a critical reflection on that yet, and from a curriculum instruction perspective, so we encourage everybody to think about what that's actually going to look like in the fall, because we know it's going to be a component of our work. And I think the involvement of us as parents in that spring remote learning work has really given us some insight into what the curriculum looks like. We knew that there was a strong emphasis on literacy and mathematics, at least in our experience at the elementary level. But it became even more so, or became more clear to us that that is the emphasis. And we feel that that's an overemphasis in the curriculum, particularly given the world today and what we're preparing students to engage in. And it's our role in education to help students deal with those kind of issues, such as global warming, voter disenfranchisement, systemic racism, as we were just talking about and hearing about, mental health issues, viral outbreaks and pandemics. All those kind of things need a strong social studies, science, creative curriculum as well. And 20 minutes a couple times a week just is not going to cut it. And even when we see science and social studies activities, they're often literacy based. And again, this is our experience over the past several years at the elementary level, and it may be different elsewhere. So for all those reasons, we would really encourage you all to think about a planning process this summer that gets us as well prepared as we can for the fall, but effectively recognizes that we can't put everything in place. There's just not enough time or people to make the kind of changes that are likely needed for that hybrid approach. And if there's a way that we can develop a process that would carry on throughout this next school year, that would involve parents in the community in reflection on how that is going and adjustments to that process. I appreciate the surveys that the district has been putting together to get some parent input, but that's very different than reflecting on and making adjustments as we go. So we would really appreciate a process that has that kind of reflective cyclical process to it, so that we can see adjustments happening as we go. So
yeah, Jake, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Those are all points that we've been talking about, basically since the word go, since, we had to pull the trigger on virtual learning, and it turned into 3 months of virtual learning. So absolutely, we know we've got more work to do on this, and we know that, a solid curriculum involves more than just math and reading. And we are working on that, and we do value the parent input. I would also point out that in addition to the surveys, we've got a couple of focus groups where parents can participate. This is just the very beginning. So we're trying to get more of the parent feedback, trying to figure out the way forward in sort of all this changing environment. So I appreciate you taking the time to write that letter. Again, that one's not falling on deaf ears either. We are working toward that. Toward those goals as well. So thank you. And it's
Shannon,
not an ideal situation. Yeah.
It's probably worth mentioning, because it's been slipped into my notes, but not been a focal point of my notes at any point in the past few months, that when we went out on the COVID shutdown, we were right on the verge of holding our vision of the graduate town halls to inform our strategic plan. And the base of that work is to develop a vision of the graduate, use that vision, which is semi-developed but needed to be tested out through community conversation, and then build a curriculum and instruction and supporting program to be able to deliver that. So sadly, that work has gone on hold during kind of the emergency planning and a reactivity period that we're in now. In fact, we were supposed to be meeting this Thursday in an all-day meeting with school committee, AC, and me to kind of discuss the outcomes of that and start to lay the plan. Right now, we rescheduled that work to begin again in October, hoping that we will have school open in some way, shape, or form and back on track. So I think Jake raises a good point. That is needed work, and work we're very much looking forward to doing.
Thank you, Pam, for rounding that out as well. Okay. Do we have anybody else who would like to speak in public comment? If we do, could you please put something in the chat with your name and address, and we will call on you. If not, we're going to move ahead. Bueller, anyone? Okay, so we are going to move ahead. On the agenda, the next item is reorganization. As
Shannon?
you all, yes.
If how do call-in users alert you, because they don't have the chat, I don't think.
That's why I paused to wait to see if anybody
Okay.
said anything. So I'll give it one last shot. Is there anybody who's calling in on a cell phone unable to use the chat? Would you like to speak? Would you like to make a public comment? If so, speak now or forever hold your peace. Just kidding. But seriously, do speak now. Okay, so we will move ahead. The next item on our agenda is reorganization. As you all may or may not be aware, we have two new school committee members. A Manchester rep, Matt Harrington, has joined us, and also Lisa Whitman, who is also on the call with us. So we usually do a reorganization at this point. Given the fact I think Matt has not been sworn in, and I think Teresa has, we may hold off on that because that will change committees. We'll be looking at, a reorganization. So I think maybe we should hold off on that if everyone's all right with that on the committee. If you have anything you'd like to add or you're not all right with that, please let me know. We have any comments from the committee? No, all good. Okay, so we will keep things as they are. We are missing right now a vice chair because Rachel is no longer with us. We really appreciated her service. Oh, Matt's on with us. Matt, would you like to hop on and just give us a little visual and say hi? I just saw him pop up on the chat.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I was just staying in the background, just kind of listening and absorbing everything. Excuse me. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to being part of it.
Awesome. Thank you. And we'll
welcome aboard.
Keep us posted on swearing in with Christina. So
I will.
Great.
Welcome
aboard. Thank you. Hi, Ken. There's Ken. Okay, so why don't we move ahead to Pam's chairman's report? Oh, no, that's me, my chairman report. You'd think it's Monday, but it's Tuesday. I don't really have anything to report. Yeah, that's it. We have two new members. We're excited to have them aboard. We're looking forward to working with them. And that's about it. I don't think there's too much going on in my world other than everything else on the curriculum. I mean, everything else on the agenda. So I don't know if we have Lucas with us, our student report.
I don't see him on, no.
Okay, great, good. He gets the summer off, well deserved. And then let's move forward to the consent agenda. So do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as submitted with the minutes of 6/16/20?
So moved.
Who was that?
Annie.
Okay, Annie made that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
That's Sarah. How are you on that? Yay or nay?
Yeah.
Yay.
Ken?
Yay. Yes.
Thank you. Teresa?
Yay.
And I am a yay as well. The motion passes.
Should Teresa abstain if she wasn't there, or I'm assuming for the consent agenda?
Yes.
Okay, you are. Okay, good. Sorry.
That's true. I was present, but not on the committee.
Full committee.
That's a good point. Pam, what do we do with that? Does Teresa just abstain from that one?
Yes, so active members present. For the
Excuse me?
the voting members should be the active members at the time that were present.
Okay, so Teresa
I will
is abstaining. Okay, thank you. We're trying to figure this out, so thank you for your patience. All right, motion carries. Thank you. Subcommittee reports. Elementary facilities. Annie, it's just you. So sad.
I know. Don't remind me. I don't think we haven't had a meeting, so we don't have anything to report. So,
I think there's a subcommittee meeting on the horizon. I don't know that they've settled the date yet. Avi, please jump in if I'm missing anything, but I think the long and the short of it is on budget, on time, and we're cruising to the finish line for reopen, even though reopen could mean a whole bunch of different things. But it looks good. I believe Lauren is going to be on site on the 21st, so looking forward to meeting up with her and going through and having a conversation about how her vision is becoming reality and how she feels about how it's looking inside. But it's great.
Awesome. Pam, just a quick question on that. I was unable to find the link that had the drone inside. Could you send that to all of us? That's kind of cool. I'd like to see that.
Yep.
Thank you. And then with regard to the subcommittee, without a Manchester rep on that, is that something that I should start sitting in on? We can talk about that, I guess.
That would probably be useful until we reorganize and set them up.
so
Okay,
I did talk to Caroline about staying on through the summer.
Okay.
But why don't we talk about it offline?
We'll talk offline. Okay, great. Finance committee, that is Annie and me, and we have had no meetings since both budgets passed. Hooray. So it's been very quiet. We expect to be picking up some collaboration meetings over the summer just to check in, just to kind of see where both towns are and to kind of check in with the towns with regard to where we are on our openings and all the changes that will undoubtedly happen. So we're probably going to be seeing a couple of collaboration meetings over the summer, but not the same kind of schedule that we had moving into the budgets. So very quiet on that front. I think policy and negotiation, neither of you guys have any update, I believe. Is that correct?
Yep, no update. And I look forward to meeting whoever will be joining that committee with me.
Yeah.
And if you feel like you haven't had a lot to do, stay tuned because there's a lot starting to come our way.
Looking forward to
both
it.
groups.
Yes. I was going to say with regard to the policy subcommittee, we may be talking about maybe splitting that or redefining it or, just it may be morphing a little bit given, some of the new initiatives we're going to take on with regard to anti-racism curriculum. And we want to align our policies with that as well. So that's news to follow. That's going to be on the come. So without further ado, there's Pam's report, superintendent's report.
I don't know if you had had a chance to see my notes earlier. My report gets into a lot of details around feasibility, which I'm happy to do now. If feasibility for reopen, and it's kind of technical, we can jump into that now knowing it's going to take some time. But if you felt like you wanted to talk about the resolutions and do the curriculum update first, you feel free to reorganize, but it's the chair's decision. I'm ready.
Yeah. You know what? I think I would like to do that. I will take you up on that. I think I'd like to talk about the resolutions first and then curriculum. And then we can talk about some of the fall reopening, planning, remote learning. And then Pam, what did you send us? I'm blanking. I read it. Was it something you were going to put before the PE purchases?
Yeah. And that kind of fits with, so my update, we don't have a lot, we did not get to do a deep dive on the survey feedback. I definitely have first impressions, and I think, it clearly calls for some improvements to be made. I don't think there are any surprises there. But the reopening update really gets into the feasibility study and talks a little bit about the PPE and the anticipated costs, which is related to the voucher. That's where I'm going. So it would make sense to do that. And then the leases related to facilities probably all at the same time. And kind of keep the curriculum and the resolutions together.
Agreed. That makes sense. So let's move ahead to the resolutions. So we have two resolutions that, can everybody hear me? I don't know if my mute's working properly. Yeah, thumbs up?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. So with regard to the resolutions, we have two resolutions that were given to the school committees from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. One is the one we have just talked about, anti-racism, and a COVID expenses, basically saying there should be no unfunded mandates with regard to COVID. I will read both of those. I want to go with the COVID state funding first. That's pretty straightforward. And then I would like to adopt, or I'd like to put up the anti-racism resolution up for a vote as well. So without further ado, the first resolution, COVID-19 state funding. Whereas if schools are to reopen this fall in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is the responsibility of each school district to do so safely and responsibly. And whereas it is the responsibility of the state to ensure that each school district is able to pay for the enormous additional staffing, transportation, and material expenses required to do this. And whereas the state cannot expect mandatory COVID-19 safety guidelines to be followed without also ensuring that each school district has the funds required to implement these guidelines. Therefore, let it be resolved that the state must guarantee every school district full reimbursement for whatever COVID-19 expenses are required to follow state mandates. We must ensure a statewide school reopening that is safe, responsible, and equitable. There can be no unfunded mandates for COVID-19. So do I have a motion to approve the resolution for COVID-19 state funding as I've just read?
So moved.
That's Sarah.
Second,
Do I
Warnock.
have a second? Ken Warnock.
Warnock, second, yeah.
Ken Warnock, second. Eric, is this a yay or nay?
Yay.
Can we
Annie,
talk
yay or nay? Yeah.
Are we going to have some discussion?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I jumped into that a little too quickly. So let's open that for discussion before we take the vote.
Great. So my first question for Pam and Avi is, do we have a code for any expenses that we know are specific for COVID-19? And
A code?
mean,
something
coding
that's
Accounting system.
delineating them as part
A
of a
line item?
COVID expense.
So not as of yet, because we really haven't, there's been a limited number that we can keep track of, but there is some discussion about allowing school districts to create separate revolving funds. So that is something that I'd like to bring to an upcoming school committee meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have more information probably at the next one. For now, we
Okay.
are basically keeping track of the limited items that there are, which are, the initial PPE order, which we put in with the consent agenda, as well as
Right.
there were some things, related to cleaning, and that's very easily distinguished. But that is something that I'm assuming we're going to want to create a separate accounting system for.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about some of the things that were in the warrant tonight that were, equipment that were, for a certain student, something was reimbursed. And so I just want to make sure that we're keeping that clearly in a different bucket so that we can have a true accounting of what those costs are.
Yes.
And as it is, a lot of the reimbursement programs that exist for certain types of items, like a FEMA grant, they do have you prepare all of the information from your ledger. So we've already started to kind of make notes on what that is so that we can quickly pull together those reimbursement requests when they are available. That's a federal grant opportunity. It only applies to certain things. But as we move further along, I think it will be helpful.
Just one follow-up. I know that we have some, you're going to be, the money for the PPE was in the warrant, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're trying to get
Voucher.
are you trying to get an estimate of where we are looking at what this number may be?
No, right now, well, I want two columns. I want one column that's expenses already incurred, and then I want another column that's like estimated, because again, we're still waiting for the state to give us more specifics on what that is. And this
I've got
is saying,
the estimated numbers in my notes coming up.
yeah, okay.
That
I just,
it doesn't take into account, my notes don't take into account what we did to respond to the emergency shutdown, but it does start to project out what
Yeah.
it could cost for a reopen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Yep. No problem.
No worries. That makes sense to track all of this so that, you know, if there can be no unfunded mandates for COVID-19, we've got to be able to track it and say, this is what we spent. We can't leave that unfunded.
I
So
also
good
think
point,
that
Ann. Thank you.
I think the towns are also going to want to see that money as well. I mean, to see what those expenses are as well.
Yeah, good point.
It has the potential to be a significant amount of money.
No doubt. Anybody else have anything they would like to discuss with regard to this particular resolution? No. Okay, so we have Sarah making the motion and seconding it. Eric has voted yes. Annie,
And
yay or
yes.
nay? Okay. Teresa, yay or nay?
Yay.
Okay, and I'm a yay as well. That motion carries, and we have accepted that resolution. So moving on to the anti-racism resolution. I will read this as well because I think it is important to put this on the record verbally. And it was revised 6/14/20 by Mask. Here we are. School Committee Anti-Racism Resolution. Whereas, as schools have the responsibility to equip students with their civil right of obtaining a free and appropriate public education, it is the responsibility of each school to ensure we create a welcoming community for all students. And whereas it is the responsibility that every district provide to all district staff, including school committee members, annual professional development on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And whereas every district will commit to recruiting and retaining a diverse and culturally responsive teaching workforce. And whereas every district will examine their policies for institutional and systemic racialized practices and implement change with sustainable policies that are evidence-based. And whereas every district will incorporate into their curriculum the history of racial oppression and works by Black authors and works from diverse perspectives. And whereas we as school district leaders can no longer remain silent to the issues of racism and hate that continue to plague our public and private institutions. Resolved, that Manchester-Essex Regional School District and all the school districts in the Commonwealth must guarantee that racist practices are eradicated and diversity, equity, and inclusion is embedded and practiced for all our students, families, faculties, and staff. We must ensure our own school culture and that of every district in the Commonwealth is anti-racist. That acknowledges that all lives cannot matter until Black lives matter. Discussion.
Hi. So just two things. You know, this is a commitment that we are making as a committee. So, and as a district, but I also just wanted to make note of the fact that if we vote yes for this, or if you vote yes for this as a school committee member, you are committing to this work, and it's work. And it's not just voting on something tonight and saying, yeah, we did it. It's hard work, and it's, again, a long game. And I just want to make sure that everybody is aware of the fact that that's what we're committing to, and that we're all committing to it. And I think the other thing is, if we vote to accept this, that we also need to include this in the school committee goals when we do our goal work, if we ever get to some sense of normalcy and do the work we usually do at this time of year. But so that's just two things I wanted to say. Also, I have every confidence in the district to meet the challenge, and I've already heard some great things from Julie, so I know that, you know, we are developing a plan, and we know that that plan will have to be flexible and adapt over time based on what we need to do. But I really do feel confident that we're going to do this well. So I am wholly in support of this, and glad that we're committed to doing the work.
Annie, I'm glad you brought that up about the goals, because I was going through my notebook last night and kind of cleaning it up. I had a lot of stuff flying around, coming out of all, you know, parts of the notebook, and I came across our goals, and I thought, you know what, given what we're going to be talking about tomorrow night, which is now, that we need to revise those goals to include this. I think in a broader sense, we have included equity, and we have included acceptance and no bias, but I think it's important to include this specifically as well, anti-racism piece.
Shannon, can I ask one follow-up question?
Go ahead.
I think one of the questions that came up when we first started talking about this, and I've talked to some people offline about what this means, but I wonder if Pam or Julie could speak to what is the difference between an anti-racist curriculum and a diverse curriculum? Because an anti-racist curriculum, to me, has a specific set of actions. And I think it's a good idea for us to talk about that before we vote on this. What does that mean?
Agreed.
Well, I can't speak for Julie, but I'll offer that I think that's where our work has to begin, which is to define what that is and to develop a clearer understanding, because I think that's emerging as the new. It may not be a new concept, but it's emerging as a new way for us to frame the work. So I think we need to become grounded in what that truly means and begin with our research and training there. Most of our training to this point, the path of discovery we were on was defined as developing cultural proficiency or examining implicit bias as a way to begin to have conversations about broadening our curriculum. So I would feel that it's very much in discussion right now. Given what we've been working on, I have not had time to personally delve deep to develop an understanding of how to frame what is truly different about it. I have a general concept, but I would not feel equipped to talk about it or coach other people in developing an understanding for it now. I think what I do know about it is how we start to define it is really going to have an impact on people's ability to receive information and do the first level work of self-discovery and reflection to see what they're bringing to the process, so we can then begin to build teachers who can be practitioners of it. And we're all going to be at a very different readiness level given our personal interests and paths that we've journeyed. So I think there is a lot of first level work to do in building capacity. I would say in reflecting on this, I do feel like we've been steadily building capacity for 10 years. When I went back to my notes, Shannon, it struck me that the concept of inclusion entered our instructional framework around 2011. So where many of the people who are newer to the district may have been working with inclusive practices back to 1994, 96, we in earnest began implementing inclusive practices around educating our students in about 2011. Then we began in earnest, I would say in 2016, 2017, beginning SEL practices. I do think those are very different and certainly not anti-racist education, but they are capacity builders to begin to look at your role as a teacher differently than just, as Jake said earlier, delivering literacy and math. So we have been on a very slow progression. I think there's an impetus to increase the speed at which we change. And I thank Andy for her confidence that we can rise to the occasion. I do think we can. I think there's great passion among the faculty to take on this work. So I think we're in a good position. But that's kind of a long-winded answer to say, I think the first step in this is learning what we don't know and being better equipped to begin the conversation. Julie, I don't know if you'd like to add.
No, I would agree with that. And based on the conversations that we've been having and even had today around these issues, we do need to do some self-reflection. And I think that was a great term, and I want to thank Jake for that. We do have to do some self-reflection in terms of where does our knowledge lie, and what supports do we need, and what kind of education do we need to learn in order to be better at the work that we're doing with all different types of families and children. So I think that's a lot of the work that we'll talk about tonight when we do our curriculum update. And I'm hopeful that I can answer some of those questions in that vein.
Thank you, Julie. And I think one thing that's important to keep in mind, we've talked about this, touched on it a couple of times tonight, this is a long game. This isn't going to happen overnight. This isn't going to happen in a month. It's not going to happen in 6 months, but the conversations are starting and the groundwork is starting. The conversations are starting and the conversations are starting about laying the groundwork. So I would just urge people who feel very passionately about this, as we all do, to be patient. We are getting there. We will get there. We may not, we may make some mistakes along the way, but I think the important thing is that we're all open to listening to one another, and that's the only way you get there, is to listen to one another. So I would just ask people to have patience and understand that we all are on the same page. So anybody else
Teresa
have
has
any
a question.
questions? Yes.
I do.
Oh,
I have a
thank you.
question. So coming into this new, I'll have lots of questions. My question isn't specific to this resolution, but for instance, we're looking at 2 tonight. How often do these come out? Because that to me gives me a sense of the weight of these. Are these pretty frequent that the MASC comes out with resolutions, or is this an unusual circumstance?
This is extremely, I can speak for myself, this is extremely unusual. This is, I think, my 8th year on the school committee. I think this is the first time we have adopted, or we have looked at a resolution with the eye toward adopting it.
Okay.
Annie, you've been around longer than I have. How about you?
I think the last one you discussed was around charter schools, and I think we ultimately did not support the language at that time. MASC will come out with them periodically, but these are I can only count that one and these 2 that we have actually taken up in session.
And
I
we're
think
seriously
charter
considering it, so that certainly adds to the weight of it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely good point, and thank you for bringing that up. Okay. Anybody else from the committee have any comments or any questions they'd like to bring up or ask?
I have a comment.
Yeah, Sarah.
I just want to say that I'm really enthusiastic about starting this work. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm so delighted to see that there's so much community support, and I'm glad to see so many people calling in tonight and hear that so many people signed Kate's letter. And I think that this is just really important, not just for the school, but for all of our communities to look at. So I'm really excited. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think you bring up an important piece of this is the community as well. So the school is very engaged, and I think it's important to work with the community. As I said, as I have said before, this is a stool with 3 legs. It's the family, the community, and the school, and we all need to work together to support that child on that stool. So that having been said, do I have a motion to accept this school committee anti-racism resolution as I have read it?
So moved.
Lisa moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Sarah's the second. Eric, what say you?
Yay.
Annie?
Yes.
Yes.
And I am a yay as well. The motion carries. Thank you all. And this is the very beginning of a very long discussion that I am confident will have very positive outcomes. We all need to work together and to listen to one another, and that's the most important thing. So moving ahead, thank you all for that. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. Let's talk about the curriculum update. Is that how we wanted to do it, Pam? I think we wanted to talk about the curriculum update and then talk about the update, the planning and opening with regard to the PPE voucher.
I think that works.
Okay, and then we'll leave the lease agreement to the end. Okay, Julie.
You're muted, Julie. You're 3 slides in and your microphone's off. Just kidding.
Sorry about that. That's good. You missed the intro. So our summer curriculum update is pretty brief, but pretty deep. So I'm sure that and hopeful that it will answer some questions that have come up tonight. And obviously, I'll be updating you throughout the summer on our progress on our different committees and things of that nature. But tonight, I'll give you an overview of some of the things that we'll be working on over the next 6 to 8 weeks. So you can skip to the next one because basically I just put a few slides here together to give you some updates on some of the work that's extended from over the course of the school year and through the summer. And one of them has to do with the literacy program update. So just to give some background and to summarize the work that we've been doing, over the last year, we've conducted a year-long program analysis to look at all of the different components that are taught for the ELA curriculum in grades K to 5 and up and including grades 5 through 8. We looked at curriculum there as well and how the elementary schools were feeding into our middle school curriculum. So we looked at our instructional practice around reading, fiction and nonfiction, all the different genres within reading, writing, phonics, grammar, vocabulary, and additional things as well. And in addition to that, we went through a process where we interviewed teachers and administrators, surveyed our K to 5 staff on a number of different surveys. I can show you them, and I will as we kind of move forward, not tonight, but in the future. Created a district literacy team to oversee the process. And through that process, devised an online reading course for teachers called The Science of Reading, which we've been offering for the last 6 weeks through the end of school, which obviously was a lot for people to take on in terms of dealing with the COVID crisis in school, but we had a lot of great participants in that course. So we're happy about that. And we also developed a summer literacy camp with our partnership with the Y to support children over the course of the summer, rising second and rising third graders, to continuously support them in their reading skills. In addition to that, we also conducted a district review of 2 core curriculum programs that are offered. They can be offered in the classroom and online. So we've been looking at our own curriculum and comparing them to 2 core curriculum components that, to give us a comparison in terms of what we have versus what we may need. And so the last piece of the year-long process was to work on those curriculum reviews, collect feedback, which we did over the course of the end of the school year. And right now we're compiling the feedback and the review materials to pull together a whole informational series around where we are in the status of our literacy instruction. And we'll be meeting with the administrative team to review that information in the next week or so. So I just wanted to give you an update in terms of where that year-long process was and how we were kind of evolving through to the end of that component. All right, so that's the first update. We'll be back again over the course of the summer to discuss those more specific pieces. But in addition to that, we're doing a lot of summer work. Obviously, I've talked about this, I'm sure, at great length now, with our professional development committee and our administrative team to discuss all the supports that are needed for remote learning. And we are working to develop a coordinated schedule of professional development for teachers, parents, and students, and along a range of a number of different topics. Some of the topics include a lower elementary platform that's not Google Classroom. It's something that can be used and manipulated by younger students who don't have the ability to type and to get into a Google Classroom format. So we're looking at a platform called Seesaw. So we know that we're going to have to do some training with teachers and parents around how to work in that dynamic system and what that can help us to do to deliver curriculum for next year. We're also looking at updating grades 3 and up, all our Google Classroom updates, what teachers may need to collect feedback from students, to develop quizzes or tests or things of that nature, to collect feedback. So we're looking at Google Classroom in a way to collect additional materials and feedback from students so that we can have more of an accountability system built in. We're looking at developing live streaming technology capabilities. What could that possibly look like? What is the material that's required in order to live stream classroom instruction? And obviously within that conversation, we're trying to figure out what could live streaming classroom material, classroom instruction look like for teachers who are working, in a different remote setting. So we're really trying to break that down and determine what are the needs and what's the cost structure around that, and what kind of training do we need to work that system up for the fall. How do we use Zoom in a new way or in additional ways to allow for large and small group breakout sessions? That's one of the questions that we're also looking at. And what are the additional technologies that we need to support a scheduled and structured instructional platform? So in addition to that, we're also looking at where do we need to update our curriculum so that we can offer these things, whether it's a fully virtual format or hybrid format, or even within the classroom instruction, should we go back to school full blown like we normally do? We know how to do that part. It's the other two we're really trying to identify, the supports needed for. In addition to that, working on through a grant that we received from the Department of Ed on digital literacy and computer science. So we're taking a look at how to build an infrastructure around that, a K-12 infrastructure, but also what kind of supports and strengths do we need to bring to our students so that we can, teach our kids how to engage in technology in a way that's going to excuse me, sorry. Now I lose my voice. I've had, these allergies all day, but now I'm getting to the end of it. And so we're trying to think of ways that we can identify what we currently teach to support our students with digital literacy and computer science methodologies, but, where are our gaps and holes and what do we need to do to really create a robust system around that? So that's additional work that we're doing this summer through our grant process. So Pam, I don't know if you wanted to jump into this a little bit to give a historical component around equity and cultural proficiencies, work that we've done in the district, and then I can explain the work that we're doing this summer to build off of that.
Sure. This was in response to a question that Annie asked, and I think I covered kind of broadly the history of how we've been trying to build our capacity to look differently at what our role is in a school. I think our long-term history is great success with traditional instruction, but starting to shift the paradigm in terms of what a school should be doing in terms of offering a full program to students in 2020. So just a quick snapshot of the current work. So this was the work that we were doing before the COVID crisis, and I'm going to preface everything with before that because things really did kind of stop dead in their tracks. And we went into very much of emergency management mode. So haven't really been able to go back and see where we left off. But the leadership team was starting to build its personal capacity really to lead its schools through a broader discussion about cultural proficiency, because we have been talking about it for some years at the school committee level and how we'd like to make some strides in that area. As Shannon said earlier, I don't think we feel the urgency. We have not felt the urgency in the past that we do now to make strides. We thought it was something that we could try to slowly make continual progress toward, but that it wasn't necessarily our first priority in all of the issues that we needed to attend to. So I had been doing some work with the regional superintendents group around implicit bias training using the Project Implicit work out of Harvard. Because we were collectively trying to tackle the problem together, seeing it as an issue in general for the North Shore. We share a lot of the same obstacles to making effective progress in this work. So we thought building our own capacity and building our leadership team capacity to take it on was a good place to start. I know that members of the leadership team, so the principals and directors, have been taking advantage of their own professional organization trainings around building a more equitable school environment and better understanding the cultural proficiency model that exists at the state level and how to implement it. If you just, over the course of the past 10 years, we've begun partnerships with Facing History, the Anti-Defamation League. We have several student action groups. So this was just a kind of a reflection inventory on some of the work we have done to try to move the ball forward, that can serve as a foundation for the work that we do in the future. So student action groups like the Humanitarian League or the GSA that we have, which is the Gay Straight Alliance at both the middle and the high school. And then work that I know is being done by both deans is slowly migrating. I think if we go back far enough, we had a very traditional discipline model. We've over the years migrated to a progressive discipline model. And now we're making strides to move into the realm of restorative justice. All of these, again, are good foundational components to some of the work that we'll be doing going forward. And Julie, I know you're working with the curriculum group this summer to take a look at some of our offerings and some of the literature that we're using. I know both elementary schools have book and research groups going. How to Be an Anti-Racist is on their reading list, so I think they're reading and processing. To the earlier question, how to develop a definition of the work that we need to do and what does it mean to be an anti-racist versus being against racism. And teacher training, people have self-selected several courses to gain a deeper understanding of the work. So as I said earlier, I think there's great passion among the faculty to dig into this work. I think it's also something that's really tangible for people at the moment. And I think everyone is looking for good work to do to improve their practice. And this is where people are putting a lot of their energy. I think in having discussions with Julie, we're looking at perhaps a third-party program review as a way of coming up with some action items to look comprehensively at our program. We did the SC resolution tonight. I think the resolution is going to trigger some policy work and revision in terms of an equity policy and maybe looking at some goals and objectives and resources around expanding our hiring practices. I know we've talked about this at school committee meetings before. We talk about this at our superintendent's group. I think that it's one of the biggest challenges for us geographically is to make strides there. But I think if we put our mind to it, hopefully we can. And then just look at continued and more formalized training. So this is just kind of a snapshot of kind of where we've been, the work that we had been doing before it's moved up on the priority list, and how we see maybe regrouping going forward. Up at the top of the slide is just 3 of the steps that I see that we've taken to, again, start to change our discussion about what it means to be a teacher and to deliver instruction and support students in the classroom. And I think it shows an effort to move beyond just a content delivery model and really into treating the whole child. And this is the next logical step in the process. So that was my long-winded explanation.
Can we stop for just a moment here? I usually like to run through this and then ask questions at the end, but I think it's important to stop here because we're looking at where we were and where we will be moving forward. And I know Annie wanted to have a discussion on this slide too. So Annie, I will open it up to you because I know you have some points that you wanted to make on this.
Sure. So I'm thinking about the resolution that we just passed and the commitment that we made. And we have answers right now, but, Sarah gave us a great webinar to look at that was helpful. And there were some resources that were noted in that webinar that I've been looking at. And I'm wondering if we can schedule, I know we are not having our traditional retreat, right? But I think I'd like to have a chunk of time for school committee to kind of talk about, okay, well, what's the work we need to do? Because, there's that old saying, show me your budget and I'll tell you where your priorities are. And there are a lot of things that we should look at as a committee, policies, what bias is built into any of our policies. And I'm hoping that MASC will be doing a review of their policies and giving us some suggestions on things we might want to revisit and look at over the course of the year or whenever. But I'm just wondering if we can have a working session where we talk about, okay, well, if we said this, we made this commitment, what's the work we need to do as a committee to kind of do the pre-competence work or that self-reflection. We said we were going to do it in our resolution. So when can we, I just want to make a note that we should schedule something like that this summer.
Sure. And I would say the first step is probably training before you start unpacking things and trying to figure out what we should do. We may want to start with the third party review. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lengthy one to help us make an assessment of how to best spend our time to advance our goals. Because I think without having a clear understanding of how to build a process for completing the work, we could spend a lot of time sharing kind of opinion about, there's a large and varied body of literature out there. So do we want to zero in on one or two organizations like the Harvard Project to guide our work? Do we want to, again, this was a quick reflection slide, but we're partnering with the ECLC. We are looking to them to maybe be an assist. Our new coach, I believe, has some experience in this area. So could he be someone who helps us develop a pathway forward on this? I do feel like we know what we want to accomplish, but we don't know what we don't know in terms of how to define it in the steps of the work. So I'm always for a working session, but we may want some guidance before we jump into a working session. Or we may want to take ourselves to the implicit bias training as a starting point.
I have to say I am in agreement with you with regard to the audit, because I think having a third party come in and take a look at everything we've got, where we've been, where we'd like to go, I think is really important for to help us define where we want to go and how we're going to get there. So I am in favor of doing that. I'd like to see that happen, that third party audit. So just my 2 cents there.
But to speak to that, I mean, everyone is going to want to do a third party review, and I don't know where we're going to, you know what I mean? Like we talked about a little bit about, we don't know what resources will be available to us. I'm just trying to think of establishing some things that we can do in the short term. And I'm not saying we're going to, solve it all. It is a long game, but we can do some work now. And I just want to know, what is that? And how are we going to organize this effort initially? And again, knowing that it will change. And so I'm proposing that. We don't have to get into it too much, but I just like to throw it out there.
So I'd ask you to consider that we would model the training initiative that we may expect our staff to participate in.
I have a thought.
Yeah.
So we do it first.
We do it first.
Yeah, I think that's all awesome, and we should definitely do that. If we want to jump in and get started on something right away as a board, we could do as a school committee, we could choose one of the books that's recommended and do a read and have a discussion just to get ourselves going and get the ball rolling. I think that might be smart.
That's easy enough to do. So do we want to discuss doing that here, or should we have this? I don't know if we can have the discussion offline about what book we'd like to read. I don't know if we can deliberate via email on that, because that is considered deliberation.
Why don't we do some research and make a decision at our next meeting?
Sounds good. Pam, was that what you were going to say?
Is you could have your subgroup just look at a couple of titles and make a recommendation next meeting.
Okay. And we're getting a recommendation that How to Be an Anti-Racist is really great. And that seems to be the book that is, very au courant, probably for a very good reason. So, okay. If nobody's got any other comments or questions, let's move on and get through this.
I think Jennifer wanted to say something.
I just had a quick thought. So we had a great kind of grassroots meeting with some teachers from various grade levels today across the district. I just wonder if we could empower the teacher leaders that have such passion around this. And there were already a million good ideas discussed today. It's not that I'm opposed to an audit, but I just sort of feel like we have such talent and such committed people with so much passion that if you even tapped into the small group that we spent an hour and a half today having this discussion, we already created a document in Google of sharing resources. You know, we kind of were talking K-12 and the importance of how we need to lay the groundwork in kindergarten, first, second grade. It just doesn't start in high school. So my thought and my recommendation would be to kind of empower the teacher leaders and let's get a group of committed people together and let's kind of own this ourselves. So that's my thought. I will mute myself.
Thank you, Jennifer.
And I think that's definitely a great point and something that we had an awesome meeting today. I feel like all the meetings around these things are so great because we do have people who are super passionate about it, who have already started to do some of this work on their own, and who are just gearing up to connect with people and to figure out a way to really make this something that they love because they're so impassioned by it. So we do have two groups right now in the district who have just kind of sprung up to work on these things. And one of the groups is dealing with just looking at these goals here, creating a school environment in which students feel safe and accepted, building empathy, embedding practices in the curriculum, K-12 curriculum, create partnerships between schools, build a relationship with parents as partners, and align with our SEL work that we currently have underway in schools. And so just some of the talking points from today's meeting. We were talking about coordinating resources between elementary, middle, and high school, including some of the Reading for Change work. Samantha's put a great book group together on multicultural reading challenge that she's had underway for a while. So we're trying to get ideas of what are we currently doing, what do we already have that we can tap into and build on. We have teacher book clubs that are currently on point and happening. A civics curriculum that's being built at the middle school level through Joanne McWhorter's work. And she's reaching across other content areas to work with the ELA teacher in the middle school on her team, and Janda through the health curriculum. So, and we're also thinking about working with ADL to coordinate a middle school and high school connection that can hopefully effectively help us guide some of the work at the elementary level. And this is all people who are already doing it, and just looking for a way to connect. So it was a really great day today just to hear what people were doing and just how excited they were about building connections across schools and grade levels. It was great.
I think that's super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't get anywhere without building those connections and building those bridges. I know that where are we? I'm looking at all of these. We're getting a lot of chats here, but I know Teresa had a question.
I do, and Julie, you sort of just alluded to that about after discussing about today's meeting specifically. On the previous slide, I just want to clarify, you had on there about the elementary book group studying how to be an anti-racist. How did that come about? Was that a grassroots thing, or really because it didn't come from here? So how did that come about, number one? And number two, are Memorial and Essex Elementary doing that together, or are these separate things that are now looking forward to working more together?
The How to Be an Anti-Racist is a grassroots effort that came right out of Essex. I think they've already been working on that. We do have another group that's gearing up to do work at Memorial on a different title. So we have two different books that we're talking about tonight. So Jennifer, if you want to talk about your group, jump right in.
I think I don't want to say the name of the teacher because I'm not sure she wants me to. I don't want to embarrass her, but we had one staff member who probably, like a lot of us, had such a strong reaction when a lot of things were happening in the world, and her need to reach out to all of her colleagues because we weren't in the building where we could have those conversations at the lunch table or whatever. She sent out an incredible email that was well spoken, really articulate. And she basically said, I feel the need that I need to do something immediately. And she had quickly done some research, came up with the idea of this book, and then also shared a list of children's literature that focused on this topic that we're all going to take a look at for how we could use. So it was a grassroots thing. I will tell you that I'm guessing maybe 14 people jumped on it within like an hour, including myself, because I felt so compelled. And we just finished reading the book. It's a heavy read, so it's not beach reading. If anybody's wanting to read at the beach, don't bring this. But I think a little bit of what Pam alluded to before is the very first thing that needs to happen is we all need to do some soul searching and some self-reflecting, because I found when I was reading this, I had a lot of moments where I really questioned myself. And I don't think we can actually start doing this work until we have those types of, thoughts and discussions. So today we came together with, the middle school and high school folks, and the passion that was there, that's what I guess I was bringing up, is that I want to tap into all these teachers, leaders who feel so strongly and want to kind of make something happen, because I think that's the power in that. So I'm just really proud of folks for, how quickly they jumped on this. So Teresa, I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I hope it does.
It does. Thank you. I just was wondering if this was something that was together between the two elementary schools, or if they were doing their own separate things. It was a little unclear, and I'm so excited to hear that was something that came from an impassioned teacher.
Yeah, and I can't speak for Memorial because I'm not there, but based on the conversation today, it sounded like they have a book group going, a different book, probably a similar type of discussion. But I think if we get this kind of thing with some traction, some of these books can get talked about, and we can continue to have more book groups and invite everybody in the district to join, so we can broaden that.
Can I jump in here? This is Samantha. Can you hear me?
Yes, please, Samantha.
So Essex is doing How to Be a Racist, and we've been looking, or I should say, I've been looking at
How to Be an Anti-Racist.
I'm sorry, How to Be an Anti-Racist. And John and I have been talking about white fragility, and I've done some research on that. And so we're hoping to actually jumpstart it next week. And I kind of think the idea of, I thought, should we be doing what Essex is doing? But to me, I kind of feel like expanding our horizons as much as we can makes the most sense, so that if we're reading one book and another group is reading another book, then we can extend into the school year and continue the discussions, instead of just kind of having a book group that's nice, sweet, and short, and then everybody goes their separate ways. But we can just continue the discussion. The more we're reading, the more we're learning. So that's one of the reasons I've personally been pushing for white fragility, which has come highly recommended. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha, and thank you for the efforts as well. I did want to bring up these chats are getting ahead of me a little bit, but I know Tricia brought something up about coordinating. I'm trying to find it. Vertical alignment of curriculum beginning pre-K through 12. So I think that's important when we talk about one school reading one book, one school reading another book. I don't think they have to be the same books, but I think, we always talk about having equitable programming in each school. So I think that's important also to keep in mind. We just want to be, I think, getting to the same endpoint with each school and providing the same experiences for the kids in Manchester and the kids in Essex. So I just would like to keep that kind of at the forefront. And I love to hear that the teachers are so passionate about this and starting all of these kind of grassroots efforts. And I think that's fantastic. That makes me really happy. Does anyone else, you know what, why don't we move ahead with this, because it looks like we've got quite a bit on these slides. So thank you.
So
Ready for the next one?
Yeah, and honestly, this is the end for me, at least.
God.
Hey, y'all, can we please mute, because we can't really hear the speaker?
Okay. Our second group, another grassroots group. And this group is coming through the Professional Development Committee, but also just teachers who are interested in organizing professional development across the district for teachers and for families to look at hiring practices. We have teachers who will be attending national and statewide anti-racism trainings this summer that they've found that they think would be really super supportive and helpful to us in these conversations. The PDC is creating opportunities to build out those trainings. So as our teachers are learning things, bringing them back and trying to figure out a way to do just what you said, Shannon, build out trainings that all teachers can participate in, since we don't have the ability to send everybody to everything all the time. So to bring it back and create some kind of model to support teachers with these trainings that they're learning from. And then try to find trainings that we feel would be really helpful. And this could speak to some of the webinars that we've been gathering on social justice, implicit bias, how to be better about understanding what all these terms mean and how they impact our work with students and with families. And then just reviewing our options. This committee is committed to reviewing options for the district-wide kind of review on where we stand and where we need to grow, and looking at hiring practices and opportunities for involving more people within the process of getting more people to apply to work in our district. So that's the work of the second committee. It just as equally impassioned people who are kind of taking a different focus, which is let's train teachers, let's work with families, and let's look at our community as a whole to try to build additional resources and supports that way. So that's just as exciting, just a different lens within the same topics.
And I would offer, if we were going down the route of a review or a third-party audit, the fantastic work and energy is definitely around our practice in our classroom, but there are entire structures around the classroom that will impact our ability to do this work comprehensively. And it includes the structure of schooling in general, things like the hiring practices, but also our two communities and structures within our communities. So the audit may not be just our curriculum and instruction program or training base for teachers. It may have a lot to do with community and district-wide policies and how we are structured to do business and who has access to it. So it's just a thought. It doesn't have to be where we start. It could be where we grow to. But thanks everybody who jumped in to support my theory that there was a lot of positive energy and enthusiasm around taking on this work and making change happen. And thank you for your leadership in getting that done.
I will second that. Thank you. All right. So why don't we move ahead? Pam, why don't we talk a little bit about the, very quickly, the remote learning survey feedback, and then we'll talk about reopening planning and the PPE order.
So as I said a little bit earlier on, I have not been able to yet do a deep dive into surveys, and we have 3 different surveys out. We have a teacher survey, a parent survey, and I know Tricia has a student survey out in circulation. I think in a very quick overview of them, it's very clear that remote learning is not our preferred mode of doing business in the district, probably from all of the constituent groups. Maybe the kids are a little bit more positive about it than parents and teachers, but there was not a high level of satisfaction with remote learning. I think one thing that came through, particularly from the parents, just in an initial read of them, is that they felt, particularly if you had kids in different levels in different buildings or with different teachers within a building, there was inconsistency among staff within schools and across the schools in what students were receiving for an instructional program, whether it be time of the day, frequency of Zoom meetings, or the rigor of the content. So I've sensed general frustration with the experience, and lots of people were very understanding and kind of prefaced their frustration with, what else can you do? We're in the middle of a health crisis. But I think there's a general feeling that we can do better, and it needs to have more structure, a simulated school day, accountability for students and staff as we enter the next phase. We did, thanks to Teresa, threw in a positives question in the revamped survey. And I think people found the positives there to be, again, a general review says time with family. So this is not a comprehensive analysis. We'll have more information for this in our second July meeting. But I think nothing surprising. I think we went into it knowing that we felt that there was some weak points to our remote learning plan and that it needed to be greatly improved for the fall, and the parental input has supported that to this point. What I'd like to do is look at it comparatively to see how closely we do align with the faculty group. So more to come on that. What we've been doing since our last meeting is really trying to prepare our feasibility study in terms of the state's new charge to be ready to go back to in-person learning in the fall, and the guidelines that they released to do so. I think in a couple of the comments tonight and in conversations about the return to the fall, I think one thing worth mentioning off the top is we're in a bit of an interesting position between what is guidance and what is a directive. And I think at this point, the sense is all of the medical guidance is actually directive. It is non-negotiable, along with our understanding that a return to school at this point in preparing for an in-person return to school is not necessarily negotiable. We may learn more about that in the coming weeks, but if you look down to the fourth main topic, the DESC right now is working on making a determination on whether or not attendance is going to be compulsory. So in a typical year, it is not a choice whether you go to school or not. And understanding that we're in a unique time period, there's been some discussion about what level of choice will families have to keep students home. And we just don't know yet whether or not the requirement will be to send your children to school, or there will be some choice involved. So that being said, our marching order as a public school in Massachusetts is prepare to open and do so in compliance with the health and safety guidelines that have been issued by the Department of Ed. That sounds very bureaucratic and very top down, but that is a bit of the environment we're working in now around returning kids to school. So if you've been following the story, the health and safety guidelines are a bit cutting edge. They've been endorsed by the Mass Pediatric Association, and they were additionally endorsed, I believe, by the national group. It weighs, I think the key thing, and I take the time to give this background because I think it's important when you see the messiness of what return to school might look like, that we are all going to have our personal opinions on safety, but the medical recommendations and the data is supporting their medical recommendations. I think they spent a lot of time weighing the health and safety impacts of staying home versus the health and safety impacts of going back into school. And our particular community may not feel that the health and safety impacts of home are as detrimental to students, because they cite things like an abusive home, a home where there's alcohol abuse, absentee parenting, drug use, food insecurity. In those environments, that home may not be a healthier environment. So having the student in school with a caring adult, even though it's not optimal learning, may prove to be the better healthy solution for them. I think they've also taken time just to think about the social emotional health of students, and kind of making the case that having them back into their routine and back into the school building is a more positive environment for them. I think Jake raised a point very early in our meeting that I think once we start to lay out what being at school might look like, different families will have different opinions as to whether or not that's a healthy environment. And that's for discussion later on. So what we've done over the past couple of weeks, and the principals and Jason, the director of facilities, Avi, Julie, and Allison, everyone has done an incredible job to try to piece this together. They have studied the buildings. They've studied some different square footage configurations to figure out what we could accomplish at school. So jumping in.
Hey, Pam, can I just ask a quick question? Someone asked a very, I think, important question about the recommendations and how long ago were they received?
Sure. And if you guys just want to pile questions in to the chat, we can go through them at the end. That's a great one, though, Cheryl, because yes, these recommendations were developed and published when there was a very different national climate, although and things seem to be changing around us, although not in Massachusetts yet. There is some discussion that the CDC may be issuing revised guidance that aligns with the Pediatric Association. That remains to be seen. But I think the point you're making is, seems like it's a different world now than it was 3 weeks ago. What will Massachusetts look like 3 weeks from now? So I guess I should say right up front, which is probably on my end slide, this is all subject to change, and we could be having a completely different conversation 2 Tuesdays from now in terms of what the world looks like. But until we know differently, this is what we have to at least go through the process of studying the problem and having a game plan should we be compelled to return to in-person learning. So we studied the physical space. We did some very back of the envelope cost estimates. This goes to Annie's question earlier in terms of what is COVID costing. Different areas that we had to look at under there was reorganization of the facility, additional staffing, tech, transportation, which we still have no real working framework for that. And I think something we're going to have to start looking at as we get deeper into the summer is available staffing. We are promised some type of legal guidelines in terms of helping manage people who are in high risk situations or have homes with high risk family members, and how we are going to have to manage their access to FMLA or leave time, given that it may not be physically safe for people to return to work. And then, of course, we need to provide the right professional development and training in addition to everything else we're doing just to get people in the door and able to use the tools and implement some of the potential medical protocols that might be in front of us. And then this goes back to some of Jake's concerns at the beginning. Once we figure out kind of some of the physical construct, looking at the program and the impact of the program, and can we deliver something that we feel comfortable with? So quick rundown of the guidelines, and I will try to be brief, but there is a lot of detail in here. So the guidelines came out and basically say that 6 feet or more is optimal for social distancing, but you need to provide at least a minimum of 3 feet between students' desks measured seat to seat is where they've gone with that. And that all classrooms should be arranged with the desks facing forward. Additionally, all students in grades 2 to 12 will be required to wear masks. It is strongly recommended and encouraged that K1 students also wear masks. Families are to provide the masks, but mask breaks will be provided during the day. The other key component in the guidance is the attempt to minimize movement. And this is where we know a little bit, but not enough to fully form our plans. So the guidance is asking us to do is for elementary and likely middle school, you would be assigned to a classroom for the duration of the day, including lunch in the room. So if you can start to see the picture developing, you're in desks facing forward, wearing masks in one room for the duration of the day with some mask breaks, but we're unclear as to whether or not outdoor breaks or gym breaks would be allowed. Unclear at this point as to whether or not different teachers can come into the room. So can we rotate through the art teacher, the music teacher, the PE teacher, or do we have to limit a cohort to 1 or 2 adults and one group of students for the duration? So that's kind of the model we're working on now. It's also going to require the high school to basically organize into teams or cohorts and also maintain in-room lunches. Now, there's potential for some movement. They're talking about at the high school level, meaning allowing the kids potentially or teachers potentially, unclear, to move from room to room. And we anticipate learning more later in July. With the reorganization of the high school into teams or cohorts, we perceive that there'll be aside from programmatic issues, the state may provide some restrictions on electives that are deemed high risk. And right now, a couple of examples would be band and music and chorus, as well as PE. The issue with the band and chorus is the projection of spittle. I think there's going to be a mounting counter case that there's precautions that can be taken, but the DESE has signaled that they may be weighing in on whether or not we can offer these electives. And then last but certainly not least, all the staff are required to wear masks. We're having some discussions about the benefit of the face shield versus the mask, or the need to combine face shield and mask. And we would be certainly providing clear plastic masks if necessary for kids or adults who need to have access and view of a person's mouth. And I think the staff raised a really good point in our town hall this morning, that the face shield is preferable probably for teaching, because there's so much gesturing and facial movement and body language to be read that it would be helpful to have the face shield. So that's just a summary of kind of what we've been working on and the guidelines we've been working under. So here's kind of an overview of what we found at the elementary level. So what Jason and the principals did was they went through and charted the range of options. So we went, best case scenario, highest level of precaution, 6 feet, back down to 3 feet. And what they found is that with the majority of our classrooms being between 880 square feet and 950 square feet, and there are a couple that are a little bit bigger and there are a couple that are a little bit smaller, but this is the majority range, that we could bring back both Essex and Memorial students into the building at 4.5 feet of social distancing, which would allow us to maintain current class size and have one classroom section with the teacher, necessary aides assigned to one place in the building during the day. What it may require, and John did a really nice chart kind of showing what he might do. So in the new Memorial School, the K rooms may have to become grade 5 rooms because they are the larger square footage and those class sizes are bigger. Jen showed in her work how at Essex Elementary, something like the art room or the library may need to be used for some of her larger class sizes at grades 3, for example, and 1, to house those classes, because you could get that whole class cohort in there because the square footage is better. It may not be the optimal room, but you could reorganize it and create a comfortable classroom space for kids there. So I think the good news in the feasibility study is we can get all of the elementary students back at 4.5 feet. The bad news is we can't get to 6 feet of social distancing. 2 caveats: we could not add school choice under this model, and if there is an unanticipated surge in enrollment due to people not returning to private school or people moving into the community, it could create space concerns. So this is very heavily dependent on enrollment at the elementary, and we keep getting little breaks along the way, whether it's with our budget or with this type of a process where the enrollment is in a spot right now where it's helping solve this problem a little bit. I will pose some questions later on about our comfortability at 4.5 feet, but that's where we stand with the elementary. Now, moving to the middle school, what the principals and Jason learned was that we have a space problem at the middle school. But I think this isn't new to us, because we've been talking about the space constraints at the middle school since we saw the surge in enrollment several years ago, and we had an interest in adding teachers, but couldn't really add teachers simply because there was no physical space to put them in. So we're revisiting that problem a bit at this point. So looking at the middle school, if you take their traditional configuration, so grade 6, 5 different classes, 5 different sections, averaging 22 students per section, we could only get them in if we went down to 3 feet social distancing. That may also be the case for grade 8, although it starts to get a little bit tighter. So very heavily dependent on enrollment. And right out of the gate, grade 7 doesn't fit with our average size classroom of 750 square feet. Remember, we have to take out for teacher space. So, using that as the general average, we are barely doing it at 3 feet. We'd have to do something with 7th grade to kind of farm them out throughout the building. I think there's a general concern, even though it may be beyond our choice at some point, that, and Joanne has been a very strong advocate here, 3 feet does not feel like it is workable in the middle school environment. Kids don't sit in their seat all of the time. The desks migrate, and as soon as they get up and start to walk around, it feels like you would be breaking the 3-foot plane. Never mind when you get to lunch and have to take masks off, you're not anywhere near the 6 feet you're supposed to be when you're unmasked. So I think we have some questions about 3 feet, and we'll revisit that at the end. What the work Joanne did was to look at what happens if you take your classes and you subdivide them into 2 sections. So essentially doubling the number of sections that you have at the middle school. So the class of 22 becomes section A of 11 and section B of 11 students. At 11 students, you could get them to the 4.5 feet of social distancing that you're using at the elementary level. But you would have to have 2 cohorts in your building, the A group and the B group. At some point, let's call the A group the in-class group. The B group would be assigned to some alternative space within the building, either, depending on space, a classroom that's created temporarily to house the students in that group. And we'd have to, chop up the CAF, the library, the gym, et cetera, into classrooms to do so. And you need 15 classroom additional to split each of the sections at the middle school in 2 and have them all in the building at the same time. We've been asked by the state to even examine modular classrooms. I think we know from past experience, you're looking at least 250 per unit, not counting installation, and it's a very long lead time. So I don't know if ordering now, we would have them in place. That doesn't even take into consideration getting a contractor and all of the specs and all of the work that goes into that process. Then the other option that we could look at is housing the B groups or the alternate groups in larger groups of 30 to 50 students that would be either in the gym or the CAF or the auditorium, socially distanced, but with 1 or 2 teachers at a time. And in both those scenarios, if you weren't on the rotation of being in the classroom, but being in the alternative space, you'd essentially be participating in remote learning within the building. So like an in-house hybrid model where you would be hopefully tuned into your classroom. I think we're anticipating live streaming the lessons. So again, to Jake's point, what does it look like in school for a student? Well, you could be in an alternate spot with a laptop and headphones following lessons that are going on in a different room. I think if we learn more about rotating staff, we may catch a break. But if we wanted to say, that's not what we want to do, that's not quality enough for us, all of those sections should have their own dedicated teacher. We could repurpose teachers from other content areas or specialty areas for the duration of the year and have them teach the curriculum in tandem with the teacher. Or you could look at hiring a whole new set of content area teachers for the B cohort, and that would average, I think, 15 teachers additional. Just to handle management and supervision of additional spaces, we may be looking at 5 to 10, depending on the configuration. And that is a very early estimate, so please don't get too crazy about what that figure could be. I think we would really have to more tightly work the numbers. So middle school presents some really significant challenges to bringing kids back into the building. We either have to get down to a really tight social distancing, or we have to do somewhat of an internal hybrid, which would put kids on a remote learning rotation out of the gate. So I can at least explain, thanks to Joanne, and in the high school issue gets more complicated. So middle school, you can kind of see a pathway, and I would say Tricia has done the best she can with the information we have, but the high school challenge is probably the greatest of all, because the entire basis of the program the way it's scheduled now requires the intermingling of different students throughout the day, right? So what you can achieve at the elementary or middle school with creating a cohort of 22 or 10 or 18 students that can maybe stay together all day and maybe rotate the teacher, you can't even get to that at the high school because of the specialized program as you advance through the curriculum. So to answer the math problem, yes, you can bring all the kids back into the high school at a 3-foot social distancing measure, maybe 4 feet if you get class size down to 18. But to create those class sizes, you need to, Tricia reports that you need to heterogeneously group all of the students. So you start by eliminating leveling and probably eliminating access or severely limiting access to specialized courses unless they're offered online. So you'd basically be creating groups of, let's call it 20 kids that would report to a room, maybe be allowed to change, maybe be allowed to have their teachers change through, but they would not be your traditional groupings of students in course by level, and the elective program would be severely limited, we think, at the 11th and 12th grade. Based on conversations I had with both a state superintendent's group and the regional group today, high school is the area of greatest concern in terms of problem solving, because it seems to be, while there are many undesirable components of returning in person at both the elementary and the middle school, because of the way they're configured, they seem slightly more attainable. It's the high school program does not seem like it can be delivered under the current constraints that we're being asked to work under. So that's where we're at in terms of bringing them back. So the simple question, yes, we could fit everybody, but I think the bigger question is what type of programming and what does it look like for kids on a day-to-day basis becomes very important. I think at the elementary level, the return to in-person instruction, 3 just top-level bullet points. Instruction will look and feel very different. They'll be in a single class with their teacher, and that's going to be very positive, but there'll be a lot of physical restriction. The wearing of masks all day will be required. I think that's going to be a big management challenge for teachers. Not that they're not up for it, but I think it will consume a great deal of time. And the eating lunch in room. So I think we're going to be looking as we go through the next iterations as to what kind of movement can we build in? Is there an opportunity to get the kids through the building and outside? And is there ability to give them access to other teachers? The middle high school space constraints basically impact the organization of in-person learning and significantly impact the delivery of instruction in the program that we would like to offer. And it looks like at the middle school, it would have to be some type of hybrid, even if we got them all into the building. And there will likely be some financial implications to that. Again, to reiterate, at the high school, heaviest impacts on grade 11 and 12. And we would think, and I probably should note that I think both Joanne and Trish would like to explore, if possible, an external hybrid, because they may be able to provide greater access to the program and cut back on kids being basically in kind of a study hall environment for part of the time that they're in school. And then just a very back of the envelope, this is not necessarily an AVI approved budget, but just looking at some of the high level numbers in terms of preparing for return to in-person instruction. You know, the PPE, I think we talked about this at a previous meeting. If we assume we're all going back at 100%, we could be up to $350,000 a year just on the PPE. Technology and laptops, we've already outlaid $75,000 to upgrade the laptop capacity for teachers at the secondary level. It's looking almost certain that we'll have to invest in video technology for the classrooms to be able to live stream out. We'll ballpark that at about $30,000 if it's just for the secondary. If we have to implement at the elementary, double it. If we had to add an additional 5 staff members, it's $65,000 on average per staff member, so that could be up to $300,000, and we haven't even started talking about transportation yet. So these are, again, back of the envelope estimates, and the staffing number total really does push that number up. and we will look to make sure we don't have different ways of structuring it. But these are just things that are in my mind that we should have, that we should be planning for financially, so we're not surprised. I said to the teachers today, I don't think, because of the strength of our reserves and where we are at this point, fingers crossed with our budget, that money would be a deterrent for us, because we have at least enough to cover the go forwards, and it looks like there'll be some significant dollars coming in, hopefully from the state, to help offset the costs. But again, I think it's to Andy's question. It's good to have a running total about what the financial cost of this is, in addition to, I think, the programmatic costs and the social emotional costs on kids. So I guess if you asked me for my overall conclusion, there is no clear-cut winner of what the best option is going forward. I think to some degree the idea of in-person, there's a lot of positive attached to that, because it feels like we'll return to some degree of routine. It will definitely help out families and having students be able to go to school and help on that end. But for me personally, the picture of in school, the way it's shaping up, I feel like it will be a heavy lift to make it a really positive, fun environment, but we would give it our best shot. But I think we need to be honest with people about what the day may look and feel like. I think we have to process through some questions too around health and safety of the adults in the building and what impact that will bring. Again, the entire set of guidance right now is predicated on the belief in the studies that students are not super carriers, so they would not be contributing to spread, which should give us confidence as the adults in the building. But as we stated in response to Cheryl's question earlier, there's a lot in the news that's competing with the medical guidance that's coming out at the state level, so I'm not sure how people are going to feel about that. So additional study is the impact of the middle high school and kind of reconciling the both groups' need for large space, organization of middle school classes sections, and this will get pushed back to the schools to work on. And then and I didn't update this from a conversation I had this morning, one consideration is to go back and take a look at the elementary schools. If there's available space, should we retain the 6th grade at the elementary school for one more year to alleviate a little of the pressure at the middle high school? And then another question that was asked today, which will be added for study, is there any benefit in looking at more of a hybrid remote model for the upper grades, say 7 to 12 or 9 to 12, and utilizing some of that space to spread the elementary students out a little bit more in a chain the 6 foot. So I think there's lots of good ideas that we can chase down and process on. A couple of policy level questions that emerged for me to share with the committee. In looking at the data as it came in, if one level or school's at 4.5 and another's at 3, or one decides I'd rather use classroom X instead of classroom Y because it's in a better location in the building, and I go to 3 feet, I can get the kids in. Does the committee feel like we should have at least a district minimum standard for social distancing so that it's equitable across school and grade level? So the example would be, it's a minimum of 4.5. Everyone has to have a 4.5 foot social distancing, so everybody is in the same degree of safety. So we don't have to answer it, but I think I'd like to pass that to the policy subcommittee for some consideration. And then if we have to go under 6 feet to come back in person, should we be using plastic barriers as an added layer of protection? Because I think when you look at what they're using as the science, it's multi-layered, right? So it's the distance, it's the time together, it's the amount of people in the room, and of course where those people have been or who they've had contact with. So would using plastic carols around the desks provide some additional level of protection? And I think there's competing theories on whether or not the plastic barriers are more helpful or hurtful. Again, not for decision making now, but maybe to be pushed to the policy team for further study and discussion. And then, is the committee open to having 2 different models for the elementary and the secondary? And that gets at the question of what we're seeing emerge at the middle high school in terms of the need for some level of hybrid, even if they're in school. Could the committee be comfortable with having elementary school in person at 4.5 feet because we can achieve it and deliver it, but maybe looking at the secondary as a hybrid on an AB day or AB week schedule where kids would be doing some remote learning at home on one day and then be in school on the next. And that could be either a week to week schedule or a day to day schedule. That's to be discussed at a later date. But that's a question. Also, I would ask the policy subcommittee to maybe sit and discuss with us and maybe bring forward some recommendations to the school committee. So that is I'm sorry it was so long. There's a lot of detail. I tried to streamline it as much as possible. I'll cap off by saying we still don't know if we're going to be allowed large groups, programs and after school activities, athletics. There's an entire task force dedicated to that. So that's a to be determined. And then opening and closing criteria. What happens if somebody gets COVID? Do you close the school automatically? There should be a health matrix provided for districts so that there's some uniformity in how those decisions are made regionally. And then we're all waiting with great anticipation on the transportation requirements, because that could be another big financial area for us. The most recent conversation was discussing 24 students on a bus, which seems to be a non-starter. So we're hoping that that's revised. And just kind of a sense of where we're going with this, because it is changing daily. So we reported out on our initial in-person feasibility tonight. Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to continue to study and resolve outstanding questions and policy issues. My first bullet seemed to have got cut off. We're going to be expanding the reopening task force. The goal will be to build out from our leadership and facilities team to include local DPH, hopefully 2 reps from the school committee. We can discuss whether or not the negotiation team members may be good utility players for that. The meet of presidents and likely a representative from either PTO or school council from each of the schools. I know the principals also have their teams at the building level. This will kind of be a district-wide clearinghouse that will meet on a schedule for the rest of the summer to go through some of these issues and brainstorm some possible solutions in order to revise our working plans and start to publish them out as we get further along in the process. I would anticipate revised draft plans if the state holds to its guidance, to its guidance timeline. We will hopefully have a revised shareable plan by the end of July that will tag to a return to school survey. So I've been kind of stubborn on this one. I really want to, when we ask parents and staff about returning to school, I think it's important to have some kind of concrete plan in front of them so we know what we're asking them about, what they're returning to. So as that starts to take shape, we will be reaching out to gather some specific numbers about people who feel like they're comfortable coming back, people who feel like they will take the transportation, and people who feel like they may need an alternate education setting. Hopefully we can get this all wrapped up by August 18th and then look at a couple of weeks of training before we open schools. I think it's ambitious. It's very dependent on what happens at the state level. I saw clearly in the comments from families frustration about being tethered to the state and the guidance as it comes out. Some of it is within our control and some of it is not. I think people are very committed to working on a regional level because many of these decisions, for instance, on a hybrid schedule or a remote learning schedule, what we do is going to impact our staff who work in another town. So if there isn't some state level guidance around health and safety issues, around standardization of why you close school or why you open school or what is safe and what isn't, I think we're fighting a lot of small internal battles on interpretation, and there's so much data out there. So to some degree, we are tethered to our state guidelines. In other areas, we do have some discretion, and we will exercise that when we can, but we're also trying to be mindful of where we sit in the broader region. But there is ongoing conversation between other schools, so that, I know there's also perception that what's happening in other districts is either better or worse than ours, and I think we're all feeling that. Superintendents are talking. I don't know if the school committee chairs are talking, but there's definitely constant check-ins to see if we are running somewhat similar to what others are doing, to make sure we're not leaving our kids and our teachers at a disadvantage. So that's a lot of talking on my part to say we can get them in. It would not look perfect. And we have a few more areas to study before we make some final recommendations. So let's go to questions.
Pam, first I want to say thank you for doing all this work, Pam and principals, and Jason and everybody else involved. This is a tremendous, huge lift. 3 months ago, if you told me we'd be talking about this, I'd say you're crazy. So right now I feel a little crazy. This is awful. This is awful for these students. And I know everyone is doing the best they can. It's awful for the students. It's awful for the teachers. It's awful for the families, and it sucks. But thank you very much for attempting to break it out, figure out who can fit where. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But I know that there are a number of questions, and like you said, I see a lot of frustration, and I feel it too, in all of these responses. But one that jumped out at me was, what do we do about the kids on 504 plans and IEPs? I think that's very important. How do we address that?
Is it just a general question?
Yes.
I think we're not at that level of detail yet.
Okay.
In scheduling the schools, one would think that specialized programs that have assigned space would move relatively similar to the way that they did. But I think a big question that's not answered in any of this is, in an inclusion model, you have people coming in and out of different locations and intermingling. So how much inclusion are we going to be able to deliver in a model that limits movement? So I think that's one of the future questions that we need to answer. And believe me, by no means is this the plan, or do I think this answers anything but the question, can we physically fit the kids in the building? And to what degree, what does it look like? It does not even begin to attack how you would deliver the program and the services.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to scroll down on some of these. It looks like a lot of questions were asked and a lot of questions were answered. I'm trying to see if there's anything. Bear with me just 1 second. I'm trying to figure out if there's anything we can answer right now. This is awful. Agreed. Yes, there have been questions on parents being on subcommittees, and I think one of the school committee subcommittee, the answer to that is no, because it's a school committee. However, Pam, you did mention a reopening task force that would have representatives from the PTO. So I think that that's, a good way to tap the parents.
We're going to look for a representative from each school, either the PTO or school council, because different groups are active in different ways at each building. And they would have access to, they would be in combination with DPH reps, the META reps, and district leadership team, as well as DPH reps to have the towns.
Okay. And so what would the, when would we talk about starting these task forces, and how often would they meet, or is this just in the sort of thinking stage at this point?
No, it's beyond the thinking stage, but it will definitely be a request from the principal to get me somebody to serve as a representative from your school council. We will publish the schedule, likely do that before we ask if someone is interested. And it will probably be a schedule of, I would say, 5 to 6 meetings over the course of the rest of the summer with a predetermined time. So if it works with your schedule, that's great. If not, we're going to have to get a different rep from the group. But in addition to that, we also have several different focus groups coming up for parents for this round of surveys, and we will have them for the next round of surveys as well.
Okay, so are these focus groups going to be addressing virtual learning, looking back, and how we're going to be looking at it going forward? Or are they going to be specifically on the mechanics of reopening and the logistics?
So the focus groups coming up this week, this Thursday and next Tuesday are understanding what improvements the community would like to see in remote learning going forward to next year. When we do the survey toward the end of July, and the focus of that survey is reopening, we'll also run focus groups to clarify what reopening concerns exist. The task force is an expansion of our current think tank, which has been trying to get its brain just around the process the state is using and the guidance to do some problem solving around some of the reopening issues. So think of it as an advisory committee to help us make some decisions with inputs from different groups. So we'll hear the DPH perspective, school committee perspective, we'll hear the faculty perspective from the union presidents, and we'll be able to hear the parent perspective from the representatives from the parent group.
Okay, and just to clarify, your current think tank is basically the principals right now, the principals, you, Avi, and Jason, probably your current think tank?
It's the entire leadership team with the deans, Jason, everyone who's kind of tasked with understanding the program and facilities from an internal perspective. So now we'd like to expand it so we ensure that we have the health perspective, the local health perspective, clear faculty perspective. It's really been a logistics study group at this point to try and solve some base level, math problems. So I'll be publishing that hopefully by the end of this week with what the timeline for meetings will be.
Okay, terrific. Do we have any school committee comment? Any school committee questions or comments on all of this math?
I see Annie has a question about an AB schedule. Annie, can you just clarify the question? I'm trying to get myself plugged in so my battery doesn't die here.
I don't know if I knew that I was asking about an AB schedule. But I guess my question was, can you go to the state and argue for a hybrid if you're just looking at something that's just not workable within the confines of the building that you have now? But I know you already addressed it. I'm fine, and I actually got I think someone from the administration, Trish, I think actually responded, so I'm good.
Okay, so in theory, if we want, in theory, what Lexington did by coming out and saying that they cannot do in-person instruction when they're going straight to hybrid, we've been told, I don't know if they'll follow through on it, that they're going to send you a DESE rep to go over your space planning with you to make sure you've covered all your bases.
Okay, fine.
So we have to be able to make the case that we don't have the space or we can't offer the program. So that's why we started with a basic feasibility study that is objective. This doesn't really factor in what we would want it to be. It's really just a look at what we could do physically.
Yeah.
And how it would play out. Which is hard to do because, and I give the principals and Jason a lot of credit. As educators, the first place you want to go is where Jake keeps trying to signal us to, which is let's develop the program. And this is just such a backwards exercise. We are in a reactive position. We don't control the information flow. We don't control the data. We don't control the virus, So you've got an expert team reacting to what they have. It's setting out what they think is good, sensible guidance. And by the time it gets out, it seems like the world has already passed the guidance by and is sending a different message. So I well knew going into tonight that I was going to be presenting an in-person return where most of the world seems to be, the country seems to be on fire with a resurgence. So
Yeah.
this is, I completely understand the parent perspective of being completely frustrated with the entire process, and probably with the school during the process, because it's very hard to get ahead of this and to do the work in the way we know is the best way to do it.
Okay. Any other school committee comment, question? Okay. So let's talk about something uplifting. Oh, Annie, did you have something else?
No.
I did. I'm sorry.
Sarah.
What?
Sarah, go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry. Oh, here, hold on.
Oh.
Sorry, my chickens are really loud in the background. If you can hear them, you'll know why. So I, read all this, and I am imagining these classrooms in my head, and it's totally depressing. And I agree with, I think, what Annie was saying. I think we just need to really keep an open mind and think about what could work best. And even though people really didn't like remote learning, we need to bear in mind that remote learning, the way we had it in the spring, was building the plane while we were flying it. And remote learning, as we will be able to present it in the fall, is going to be a much different picture. And when teachers have access to their classrooms, their curriculum materials, and space and time to actually present some information, I think it's going to look a lot different. So I think that everybody needs to keep an open mind, because I just can't imagine the kids sitting in rows of seats 4 feet apart for 6 hours a day wearing their masks. Like, that's just not the program that we like to present for elementary school or middle school or high school. So I just think we need to take a deep breath and keep an open mind. That's all I'm saying.
Agreed. Thank you, Sarah. I can always count on you for a little optimism, so thank you. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to discuss on this topic?
I have a question. It's Teresa.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's a tiny tangent back to Julie's slides, but it has to do with what Sarah was just saying about this. Regarding the remote learning, should it be an issue, is there any collaboration with, Massachusetts has 2 online-only schools, and so as we're working to develop this other plan, because you guys are having to develop 3 separate plans here of how to present education, is there any collaboration with others who have already done that about best practices and how that works, or are we starting from scratch because it's our own?
I'm happy to take that because I just had a conversation about it today. There should be something coming out either from the Mass Supers Association or from the DESC curriculum side on some potential buy-in options for remote learning state packages. And, they appear to be varied as our different attempts are varied. So some of them are asynchronous, which is a self-guided model. Some of them are in the mold of the old virtual high school model, which has a teacher that's coaching you along, but it still may have asynchronous components to it. So there seem to be some options where we could partner with another group to offer it. It would probably require us reorging some of our curriculum to align with it. And it seems to only present, from what I've been shown, solutions for K-8. Because once you get to high school, it starts to go in a bunch of different directions. And I know Trisha's on the line. If you want to add some commentary to it, please do. So I think we're watching that I think we're watching what emerges there, along with the determination as to whether or not it will be compulsory to return to school. So if it's compulsory to return to school, that would kind of be the homeschool option for parents who, you have a medically fragile child and you just can't return. So we can offer you a state standards-based program that will allow you to maintain access to education. I think what we're seeing, and if we're just having a conversation, others jump in, the hybrids we're looking at on the AB kind of goes along with the German school, and I can't remember the name of it that we were following, which is basically you'd be part of a 22-person class, and some days you'd be in the room and some days you would be out of the room, but you'd always be connected by live stream to the work that was going on, whether it was a small group work or a large direct lesson. So that would be kind of hard to offline, and I haven't seen, and Julie and team, if you've seen different models, let me know. I haven't seen a state level or a state scaled virtual model that has that live streaming real-time interaction with other students component. And I think that's what I see in some of the open-ended responses that we're getting from families, which is that's a big piece that's missing, that feeling part of the class, being guided by the teacher, getting some real-time feedback. So
I think
again, I can't say enough how much I understand this is frustrating, because I am so frustrated by the process and not being able to provide more for the team that needs guidance, so they can make the decisions, or clarity for parents so they can start planning their lives. It's a real tough place for everybody. I'm sorry, Sarah.
No, that's okay. I just think that it seems like in some ways a really robust online program would allow us to provide to teach our program better than some of these other models that we're looking at. So I think we need to just keep that in mind.
I think we would all agree with that. I mean, we don't want to offload our teachers, to an online format that we haven't been able to really vet ourselves. I think that's something that is really important for all of us to think about, and that's exactly what we are thinking about, how to negotiate all of that and allow a lot of the work to be done within the scope of what we would typically do in our school classrooms as we currently do or have currently done them. And I think that's a big conversation. A lot of teachers are really thinking about that and trying to weigh out all of these different options and learn all these new technologies and build all these components. And people are willing to do that and are interested in trying to figure out how to make that happen. So we are going to continue down that road.
So is the committee open to the dual structure, with the elementary looking one way and the secondary looking the other? Or is that a non-starter?
This is Ken. I would be fine with that. I was going to say I trust the kind of the judgments and the research that you're doing, because as you say, there's a lot of variation between the needs and how the students learn, and even physical space available. So our goal is to provide what's best for each student. So that flexibility is important. My thoughts. Thanks.
I have a question in the chat, and I have it too, about AP classes.
Yep.
I hear the question about the AP classes, and I'd really like to address that. I'd love to say I really don't have an answer. One kind of answer I have floating in my head is that AP courses are very constrictive in their curriculum, and they are conducive to being online, and many of them are online. So one option might be to move them as offline classes. But then again, we also want to have the opportunity for that in-person connection with kids and their teachers. So it's something we really need to explore further.
And just to add to that, there are so many components for students who will need to do lab work. So we do need to think about how to rotate or support the labs that are that are required for a lot of those courses and some of our more advanced coursework as well. And we are having those conversations, although we don't have all the answers yet, but we are definitely aware that those are components we need to factor in as well.
In terms of the AP, I'm wondering, there is that kind of lecture tutorial model where everyone attends the lecture and then there's individual tutorials with teachers. And I'm wondering, can Hamilton Wenham and Gloucester and Manchester-Essex kind of collaborate on that sort of thing where they have the lecture that is, available to everyone, and then you have the tutorials which are school-based or something like that. I mean, I think there's a lot of things we could do that way. And I'm also looking at that, I think it might have been from Joanne saying that small groups. I know that there have been kids who've been collaborating, and I don't know how well that's been received in some spaces, but in the 21st century workplace, there's a lot of collaboration, and I don't have to have all of the answers because I want to find the smart person who lives down the hall who can help me. Mm-hmm. So, and I think knowing my college kids who came from Manchester-Essex, those that succeeded had study groups. And so I just think like there's opportunities for us to employ different teaching styles or different learning models that, ultimately can be really successful for students. So I'm just wondering, I'm seeing like hints of that here. And it's giving me hope when there are a lot of dismal things in this plan, but these things are hopeful, and I'm seeing that there's some glimmers of hope here, and maybe some ways of doing things that we've wanted to do in the past that we haven't been able to. But so, Tricia, I think you want to say something.
I totally do, because Annie, I completely agree with you. I think that kids are learning to collaborate together even more than they ever have in this environment, and I think that's a great outcome. I also think that there is an opportunity for districts to kind of combine their resources in this realm, particularly around the AP program and even other programs. I know I'm in touch with the KPN League principals on a weekly basis, and we really truly want to collaborate together. And I also think in terms of the AP courses, there are all of them are offered online without an in-school offering for students who don't have access. So there is kind of access to those programs if we're not able to provide them in terms of labs and other things. But I think there's some great opportunity here to expand the way we view education, how we view districts, how we view students collaborating, and we need to harness that right now.
Great. These are all valid points, but I think we are jumping into a bit of a rabbit hole, so I am going to call rabbit. And I want to circle this back to Pam's original question when she asked whether or not the committee would support the AB model. Correct? That was the original question, Pam, if I'm remembering?
Yes.
Okay. So I want to get an idea from the committee about how they feel about this AB model. Maybe some, if I'm understanding correctly, some kids in school, some kids out. Are you talking about switching off like the cohort of the 22 or so kids, and just I'm using that as an example, on for a few days, off for a few days, that kind of thing? Is that what you're asking us, or a model in one school?
So I was broader than that. I was suggesting, is the committee open to having an elementary model and a secondary model?
Okay.
So maybe, and I think the working concept is elementary, pursue the in-person, because we may not be able to make a case against in-person if attendance is going to be compulsory, but then looking at some alternate models to be able to submit with our plans to the state of what hybrid could look like, either an internal hybrid at the secondary or an external hybrid. So like if the committee is comfortable with the elementary doing it one way and the secondary doing it another, then I would say, okay, Trish, Joanne, go to the next level, start to really sketch out what this might look like on a day-to-day basis, how these cohorts might run, what an AB model in would look like and what an AB out model would look like, and let's bring it back in the next iteration and start to have a public discussion about it and talk about it at the task force level to see what we're missing.
Okay. Okay.
But if it's something you would feel uncomfortable with as supporting as a committee going forward, we have limited time. It doesn't make sense for us to chase down ideas that just don't have broad support. Like you may
Okay.
dislike details of it, but if in concept it works, we can go to work on it.
Okay. So I know that Ken just voiced support. Annie has voiced support in the chat. Eric, how do you feel about the possibility of elementary having a different model perhaps than middle and high, or elementary and middle being different from high?
Yep, I support that. They need the flexibility.
Okay. Teresa, how do you feel about that?
I'm in support of that, looking at elementary being separate from secondary as it is structured right now. I keep seeing that bullet point about retaining grade 6 at elementary level. So I reserve the right to change that, but as a theoretical issue, I think that makes sense to keep the flexibility, and I support it.
Okay, Sarah, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think we need to keep the flexibility.
Okay, I'm in agreement. So it seems like you have kind of a unanimous thought here. So pursue that, please. I think we need to have all the flexibility we can have, that is possible in this, I don't even know what to call it, environment.
And then I see Jen's just making sure we're clear about where elementary stands. Elementary can all come back at 4.5 feet. We cannot get to 6 feet. So she just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose that in translation someplace.
Okay. And then that distance is a later conversation about whether or not we want to adopt a standard. So that's a later conversation. We're not going into a rabbit hole again.
We don't need to, and in a way you just chipped away at the answer, because you're essentially saying we can do 4.5 because you're comfortable with us looking at the hybrid concept at the secondary level. So that pushes them to 4.5 feet already.
Okay.
High school still is a big question mark about how that looks, but likely in and out. So yeah, I think you kind of answered that question by default.
Okay, great. So does anyone else on the committee have any comments on this or questions? I think we've covered a lot of ground. Okay, we can chew on it for the next 2 weeks.
Sorry.
No, go Teresa. It's important.
So I may have misunderstood, and I just want to be clear about what I'm saying I support. So the idea that the elementary might have different needs and have a different model than the secondary, but we're not saying that we're locking ourselves in right now to that 4.5, but that's a conversation for the future. Or are we locking ourselves into saying, yes, we support moving forward with the elementary schools at 4.5 feet and then just focusing on the different programs for secondary? I just want to be clear about what I'm understanding.
Well, I think you're making a good distinction, and I think that's why Jen probably brought the question up again, which is the only way right now to bring back all of the elementary is by doing it at 4.5 feet.
Okay.
And in theory, the state would want us to do so because we are well within the mid-range of the guidelines.
I see.
So we don't necessarily have a space case not to bring them back. We may have some program concerns or some social emotional concerns about bringing them back, but we don't have the case to make against physically returning them to school.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
In the Lexington model, I know came out early. What happened in Lexington, to my knowledge, is that their local DPH, much larger community, came out very forcefully and said, we will endorse nothing lower than 6 feet, which is why they went pure hybrid from the get-go at all levels. So just because I know that's out there and we've all been taking a look at that plan. So yes, we're working with the belief that 4.5 feet will get everybody back at the elementary. We've got some problems to solve at the middle high school. So they're going to go and explore. They're going to go and explore versions of the hybrid schedule. I'm hoping you guys are all still with me. My VM just kicked me out, so I'm going to have to log back in to be able to manipulate documents. But I think the session's still up and running from my looking at my handheld.
Yeah, we can see you and we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great.
So with that, I think we will move ahead. Our last topic is going to be discussing the lease agreement. So that's something nice and dry and not very emotional.
So can I just make a
wanna say-
motion? Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Annie, go ahead.
I was just going to move that we postpone the lease discussion, or that we postpone we follow the Essex suggestion, which is to do a 1-year extension while we do some work on the leases. And I'll tell you why. When we went for the vote,
Isn't that what this is?
no, I think Manchester is ready to take up the lease agreement. And when we went for the vote in Essex for the memorial school, a question came up about, well, what happens if the district ever dissolves? What happens to the investment that either town has made in the facilities of the other town? And according to the lease now, those buildings go back to the towns. And in Essex, people felt like, well, this is a significant investment that we've made in infrastructure in the other town. We need to at least talk this through. And I think that if we sign the lease agreement with Manchester for 20 years, we will not be able to negotiate that. And that was the sticking point there. So I would propose that we move to do a 1-year extension of the lease agreement for both towns, and then that the collaborative group takes that work on getting into the 2 lease agreements in the next year and bringing forward something next May or June.
Annie, thank you for bringing that up, because I was working under the assumption that what we were doing was we were going to approve a 1-year extension on those leases, as we had discussed with Brendan. So thank you for setting me straight on that. So
a couple of things just from our council is that because it is July 7th, the leases are automatically renewed based on the content of it. And Avi, you need to be my double check on this. That does not stop us from going ahead and changing and agreeing to a 1-year study. I think the other caution is that the leases, I think, are tied to the regional agreement, and I think, again, this could be what part of the study is. Changes to the lease may have to be also coordinated with changes to the regional agreement. But those could be areas for study, which could lead to just a simple renewal at the end.
I still think we need to do this work.
Yep.
And if it means that we come to a not charged town meeting to get it approved, I'm fine with that. But a former school committee representative, Caroline Weld, has agreed with me that we do need to do work on the leases. But I do think we just need to. So they're automatically renewed. So we really don't even need to do anything about it tonight, right?
Well, I think what they're looking for is the committee to agree to sign on to a 1-year amendment, an amendment for a 1-year agreement, which allows you the time to study it and does not allow the automatic renewal to take effect. And
So
Brendan
I'm
has been
confused.
a champion of trying to push both us and Manchester to get this done before the deadline, and it just has been simply our schedule and our preoccupation with other things that led to it. So I kind of feel like in good faith we should agree to the 1-year extension and kind of work our issues out through that process. I mean, it's been such a collaborative relationship as it is. I can't imagine we won't come to some agreements.
Okay. So did Gail get my motion? Do I need to repeat that?
I don't think you made a motion. You just made a suggestion. So make the motion.
I thought I made that motion. But again, I will move that the school committee approves a 1-year extension of the leases for both Manchester and Essex. And in the course of the next year, we review the leases and any implications it has upon the regional school agreement, and revisit the issue in May or June of next year.
Okay. Do I have a second on that?
Ken seconds.
Okay, that is a Ken. Eric, How do you weigh in on that?
Yay.
Yay. Teresa?
Yay.
Sarah?
Yes.
And I do as well. Motion carries. Can we try to put some time boundaries on this? Because I know that Brendan really wanted this done like a while ago. And I think if we can, do we need to have council draw up a specific 1-year lease extension?
No, he's already done all of that. That was in your packet. There's language that just needs to be fill in the blank. Yep, it's all set.
Okay, all right. So we don't need to do anything more on that. Now that's basically up to legal counsel, right?
Well, we need to talk about
this
it.
is going to
So,
be the collaboration group work going forward.
Okay.
right.
Okay, but it sounds like there are, yeah.
My impression from legal counsel is they feel like this is, from the district's perspective, a discussion between the two towns, which we should be party to because it impacts us, but it's really a resolution or a resolution of concerns in the event that the district dissolves. So at that point, we would be a non-entity, and it would be the two towns having to come to agreement on how they want to settle their finances.
Okay, so that's on the, we're going to put that on the next agenda for the collaboration meeting.
Yes. Shannon, there's stuff in the chat.
Yeah, I want to go through
sorry.
and try to recap one more time the feasibility findings and what I think what I know we're walking away to do, which is, and I think we need to acknowledge Joanne Seaman has shared that she feels that anything under 6 feet is unsafe at the elementary level. I'm assuming it's the K-12 as well, and so they aren't comfortable with that scenario. That being said, and not dismissing that in any way, I think that's kind of the next step of problem solving we'll need to work through. What I'm walking away with tonight is an understanding that based on what's reported out through the feasibility study, the committee is comfortable with us pursuing 2 different models of operation, in person at the elementary level and some type of hybrid at the secondary level, knowing at this time that the only way to return to in-person instruction is at the 4.5-foot social distancing guideline. And while I don't dispute Joanne's concern, and I think we have to have some discussions about it, the state has told us that 4.5 feet is safe to return to school, and we're expected to do so if we can meet the guidelines. So I think that's where some of the future conversation is going to have to take place around what we may be mandated to do to offer education and what we would prefer to do. What we're asking is that at the secondary level, we have the latitude to explore some alternatives that are within the guidelines for offering the program, because it doesn't look like we may be able to get all of the students in there because of the limited movement at the secondary level. Is that fair?
So that means we're closing the door, at least for the moment then, though, on looking at a hybrid model for elementary school.
For the moment.
For the moment is key there, obviously.
Yes.
And so that being the case, I just wanted to, thank you for clarifying that. And I'd like to, and Jennifer is, or I don't know if John Willis is on here too. I'd like to hear what the principals have to, or how they're feeling about that as well.
Pam, did you want me to speak to that?
Sure.
Teresa, if I understand you, the question is how we feel about the 4.5 feet versus 6, or was it the hybrid model? Can you reframe the question real quickly?
Yep, I'm just looking for, so as we're being asked to decide whether we can support moving forward with an in-person model for elementary, knowing that it would mean 4.5 feet, what is your reaction to that? Or would you, as a principal, knowing your staff and what the pulse is over there, prefer we pursue something at 6 feet? I mean, it sounds like we have a choice, at least to give support to this or not. So I'm just looking for your impression on that if we move forward supporting it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to be really honest. I have just mixed feelings. I feel like I'm living in some gray zone these days, and I'm sorry to say that. I got excited the day I went in and worked with Jason and found out, wow, 4.5 feet, like literally we can get every kid in here. And that in my mind was such a beautiful thing. But then, I was listening to the teachers, some of them speak today, and some of them are very concerned just about the notion of everything in the world. You go to the grocery store and they have 6 feet, marked on the floor. And so I think my mixed feelings comes from knowing how some of the teachers feel so strongly one way. And I was so excited with the 4.5 feet. So I'm probably not really answering your question. I love the idea of getting all the kids back in the building. One thing that hasn't been brought up is that even though if we can get all the kids back in at the elementary level, this is almost flipping their whole world upside down. All the work that we've done to have kids work collaboratively and, on the rug, and kindergarten, first grade, we teach about sharing and, being kind and waiting your turn. And this is going to be tricky for teachers to figure out how to kind of go back to what I say, like the 1950s sort of parochial looking school. So there's just so much at play here right now. So in one hand, 4.5 feet, I'm really excited I could have every kid in the building. But I also understand where some of the teachers are coming from when they talk about the 6-foot model. So I'm not hedging your question. I'm being honest, and I don't know what my real gut feeling is on this.
And that's exactly what I asked. Thank you.
So I'll say, stepping into the role of wet blanket, which I get to play on occasion, I think to help us get past our personal feelings about the science, whether we would send our children, because I think we are all going to process it in that way. At this point, the guidance as to whether or not it is safe to return to school is tantamount to compulsory education, MCAS testing, and 180 days worth of school. I don't know, and this could change, and maybe it will. I don't know that it is going to be whether or not we feel we're comfortable with it, or whether or not we can substantiate a reason why we cannot do it. So this is why conversation with DPH and whether or not they feel that they can support it. If they can't, that may be a reason why we have to relook at the 6-foot guidance. But I don't know that it's going to be a preference determination as much as it's going to be, we can make it work within the guideline, but we'd like to have at least some standardization among our district.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it's not a great answer, but I think I've been on about 6 hours of conversation about this today, and just listening to other districts processing it as well. We are all having the same conversation. Well, what does 3 to 6 foot mean, and how much latitude do we have in decision making, and should we do it? And I think we keep getting dragged back to looking at it from that perspective. I can't say that that's my favorite way to process information or to make plans, but it has helped me kind of cut through some of my personal concerns. Because I think we can't get to a decision if it's all going to be filtered through personal individual preferences. There will be, and in my notes, I did make reference to staff availability to work. There will be opportunities for staff who cannot physically work in that environment to have option for time off. So we could be looking at, hiring new staff, hiring substitutes, because people have personal health issues that won't allow them to return to work. So I think that's going to be a real challenge for us as this plan materializes.
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Sarah.
I'm less concerned about the 4.5 feet or 6 feet or 3 feet than I am about the fact that we're just not going to be able to teach the way we like to teach, and that to have these children sitting in rows and not able to interact with each other all day at any level, middle school, elementary school, or high school, is really detrimental to the program. And I'm just going to go back to saying, with the caveat that I did happen to be taking a class in online learning during the COVID crisis, just randomly, that I think we can do a lot. I think we can do a lot more than we were doing. I think that there are fabulous things that we can do online. And I just have this picture in my head of if the teachers can be in the classroom and the children can sometimes come to the classroom, And the parents can sometimes come to the classroom because it's one teacher in an empty classroom, but people could come in by appointment only. They could get the supplies they need. They could have access to books. They could pick things up. There could be small groups that could go in and meet with teachers. I just think that we could have a really wonderful, fabulous program rather than just trying to stuff everybody into the buildings just for the sake of being in the buildings. I don't necessarily think that being in the buildings everybody all the time is the best, but I think if the teachers were in the buildings, sometimes the kids could be in. We could probably figure out a way to meet everybody's special education needs better, and students could have access to all the different curriculums that they need. Like the high school students could be taking the classes they need to be taking. The elementary school kids could be having reading groups. They could be having small groups. They could be having individualized instruction. We're not going to be able to do any differentiated instruction if we have groups of the same 22 students standing in front of us all day. And by the way, in the middle school, if we're having videos of a teacher teaching in front of a room, that is not quality online instruction. That is a video of somebody else doing something in front of somebody else's class. So I just think that we really need to be open to the idea of online learning and not so fixed on trying to get everybody into the buildings. I know that's what the state is telling us to do, but I think that there are a lot of options that we can consider. So I just want to keep all those options open.
I agree, Sarah. So in taking the vote we took a little while ago with regard to the two different models in the different schools, we have said, yes, you can do that if you need to, but it doesn't mean that you have to do it. It means that if that's the one road you can go down, then yes, we can have two different models if we need to, but we don't have to. Correct?
Just full disclosure, I did write a letter to the Department of Education working group on this today.
Good.
Jen, and that's exactly the clarification I was looking for, so thank you.
Yes, so in taking that vote, and we all seem to have a unanimous position, it doesn't mean you're locked into doing that. It doesn't mean the district is locked into providing two different models in the different schools. It gives you the flexibility to do that if it's necessary, but we're not locking ourselves into anything, I believe. Correct. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I don't think we need to scrap what we did. It's an extra layer. Correct, Pam? Did we lose her? I think we lost her.
Switch out headphones. Yes,
You're not locked.
Everything's still on the table, but we're working with a 4-week time frame, just to be perfectly honest. So at some point, it's got to come off the table and into a workable plan. And if the goal is to get a workable or a proposed plan in front of the community by the week of July 27th, we're going to have to lock in on something at some point.
Well, why can't we lock into flexibility? Why can't we lock into having a hybrid model available for all schools, but maybe they'll look each hybrid model will be different for the different needs?
And don't shoot the messenger, because right now we are being directed that the goal is to return children to in-person learning.
In-person. Okay.
That's what we're being directed to prepare for.
I think we just need to keep pushing back on that. I'm sorry. I know Florida's Department of Education told them today that they have to all go back, and that just seems crazy. I don't know. I just think we need to, I know that we need to plan. I know we need to plan for what the state is telling us to do, but I just think we really need to keep an open mind.
So let me ask you about Lexington. If Lexington has said that they are mandating the 6 feet, what if we said we did that? We mandate the 6 feet, and guess what? We can't get kids back in the building at 6 feet. Will the state say, well, we gave you a range, so you got to work within that range? Is that what is?
My understanding is they're going to take us through an audit at that point. And it was their Department of Health that set the standard. And I don't know the politics behind it. And I'm sure there's some politics behind it. But I think and I don't really have a dog in the fight. We will be prepared to do the best we can in whatever situation is presented to us. But I do think we have an issue around childcare with remote learning continuing into the fall, depending on how families are situated. So I think the gear up is a little different for families if we're going full hybrid with a varying schedule. I feel, as much as it may not be well received, we may be fielding a lot of comments about it and some feedback, the sooner we can tell people that they have to start working on their work schedule, the better I'll feel about it.
I think we're going to have to be flexible with that too. I think that I think that there is a possibility that we could have a hybrid model where the schools are mostly empty except for teachers, but people could sign up if they really needed to have their students come do their remote learning from a socially distanced space in a building. And I think that families need to really be creative and think about forming pods and bubbles and having their kids work together from home. I just think all these things need to be on the table.
So Pam, what do you need from us?
Nothing that you can give me right now. Which is, I feel, I'm just going to be brutally honest. I've been processing on this a long time. At some point, we're going to have to make decisions that we're not comfortable with. It's going to be a pick our poison situation to a certain degree. And I know that does not sit well with a lot of people, but I don't think we can push off until August a physical restructure of the building if that's where we're going to land. It's like some things need to start getting into motion because we just don't have enough time. If we're aiming to try to begin instruction at least by, well, right now we're scheduled the week before Labor Day. Let's say we give ourselves training time and it's the week after Labor Day. That's 6 weeks to make all of these decisions, construct the plan, reorganize the remote learning based on the model that we choose, and train everybody up.
Okay. With the understanding that the state is basically at this point mandating us to have the kids back in the building.
To study the possibility and show what we can do. So I guess we would have to show that we could get them in at 4.5. And I think we have to solve the staffing issue aside from the physical issue. And I know the principals are probably tired of hearing it from me. I have pushed them very hard not to do what we just did, which is step 1, solve the technical problem, and then let's step 2, work on some adaptive solutions to make it better, which I think is where Sarah wants to go, which is if we're stuck with X, how do we make it the best version of X we can make it? So at some point we're going to have to land on the lemon we're going to make lemonade out of, at least for the time being. So I think that's where my stress point comes in. If we went 2 more weeks to the next school committee meeting, we could probably still have something out by that last week of July, first week of August, maybe.
Okay.
So we still need to get training in all of the remote learning because there's definitely a chance, even if we pushed all of the kids into school full time, there's a chance that it could blow up and they'd all have to be remote anyway. So regardless of what we decide, everybody needs more training in remote learning ASAP, period.
We're trying to make a decision on whether we should move to a new platform for remote learning, and that we're at least trying to hold off on that till July 15th to see if the state doesn't offer us something more reasonable as an option. But we are looking at either, I think, Blackboard or Canvas as an alternative to the Google Classroom suite. So there is a ton of training.
What does the school committee need to do about this now?
Can we go back to the decision you made before we unmade it?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm going. I mean, if we say that no, we don't support 2 different models, then does that give you flexibility? Or I'm trying to give you guys the flexibility that you need to make these decisions.
What I'm hearing from you is the committee is not comfortable with in-person learning at the elementary level, is how I'm landing.
Yes, because I think we're hearing from some of the teachers that they're not comfortable and some of the principals that they're not comfortable with 4.5 feet. So that's kind of where I'm having a tough time with it. And I think it seems other committee members are having, and I'm not going to speak for you guys, but that seems to be what I'm hearing from the rest of the committee. Even though the 4.5 feet is medically endorsed. I think we've all been so ingrained to the 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet.
So if I said at this point, our comfortability with MCAS as educators is very low. We don't think that that's the best way to do business, and we would prefer not to do it. But it's not our choice.
Yeah.
It's our duty. Like it or
Okay.
not necessarily a decision that we would have endorsed. I think that's where we're at with the guidance at this point.
Okay. Okay, I understand. So
now they could pull back on that, and if they do, I think we need to drop back and reorganize. But right now, I have not read anywhere that this is a choice.
Okay, I get it. So I would say leave the decision where we left it. We're going to give you guys the flexibility to pursue 2 different models, and that means 4.5 feet at the elementary schools. But I would also throw out there that everything is changing daily. So this may be a moot conversation in a couple of days or a week. So I want you guys to have all the flexibility that you need.
What it's going to do is let them continue to develop what the in-person physical setup would look like at elementary, and let the middle high school principal go to work on sketching out the hybrid, so we have something to discuss in terms of what it looks like in terms of delivery of the program. And I think we can try to put a little bit more on what the program might look like in person at the elementary, which may better inform if we are given an opportunity to push more for hybrid. Again,
that's exactly, yep.
So
that's exactly what I was going to say about that. It will give us something to push back on the state with, some data, if we need it, and if we decide to. So, all right. That was confusing, but none of this is easy. So, all right. So I'm going to wrap that part of the conversation up. Thank you very much. And I'm going to move to school committee comment. If anyone on the school committee would like to make a comment, ask a question, please no. Okay, my only comment I'm going to make one is thank you for all of this hard work. This is not easy. This is not fun. These decisions suck, in a word. And I will use bad language tonight on that. So, all right. With that, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Sarah, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? I know you are all in favor. So everyone be safe, be well, and we will see you in 2 weeks.